Yes, people, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all South India students. How are you? Hope so you are well. I am also good. So today we are going to revise the return filing and assessment procedure topic. First section in this topic is related to return filing, that is the normal return. First section is section 139.1. 139.1 says that like who is required to file the return. So first, in case of company and partnership firm is always include the LLP. In case of partnership firm and company, return filing is mandatory. Sir, question is that suppose any company is incorporated on the 30th March, there is no business, then also is company is required to file the return? Answer is yes. For company and partnership firm, return filing is mandatory. They have losses, profit, they have business, no business. If any company is incorporated or partnership firm is formatted, they have to file the return. Now try to understand other assessee, other than company and partnership firm. Other assessee is required to file the return only if your gross total income. Gross total income is income before claiming deduction under chapter 6A. Gross total income, but gross total income also before claiming the exemption under section 54, 54B, 54D, 54EC, 54F, 54G, 54GA, 54GB. Means before claiming this exemption under section 54, if your gross total income is more than basic exemption, then you require to file the return. Otherwise, there is no need to file the return. After that, all people please pay attention. There are certain other person also, they are mandatorily required to file the return. First point says that if any individual is a resident and ordinarily resident, if any individual is a resident and ordinarily resident, he is a beneficial owner of any asset located outside India, including the financial interest in any entity located outside India, or a signing authority of any account located outside India, that person is mandatorily required to file the return. What I am saying that all people just pay attention. I am saying that any person that is the resident and ordinarily resident person, that should be an individual. So any resident individual, if that person is a beneficial owner of any asset located outside India, including financial interest in any entity located outside India, or a signing authority of any account located outside India, that beneficial owner is mandatorily required to file the return. Now suppose if any resident and ordinarily resident, that person is not a beneficial owner, but suppose if that person is a beneficiary of any asset located outside India, including financial interest in any entity located outside India, that person is also required to file the return. But guys, try to understand, if beneficial owner already filed the return in India and beneficial owner already included income in his own income, in that case beneficiary is not required to file the return in India. Now, by Finance Act 2019, Nirmala Sitharaman ji made certain amendment, and Nirmala Sitharaman ji is saying that three persons are also mandatorily required to file the return. If any person having the one or more current account, and in the previous year in current account, if your deposit is more than 1 crore, in current account you are having the current account, one or more current account, and in the previous year in deposit in that current account is more than 1 crore, you are mandatorily required to file the return. Or suppose you have spent expenditure on the foreign travel of yourself or any other person, and that expenditure is more than 2 lakh, you are required to file the return. Or suppose you spent on the electricity expenses, electricity bill in a year is more than 1 lakh rupees, you are mandatorily required to file the return. So what I am saying that all people just pay attention. If any person having the current account and one or more current account, in a year your deposit is more than 1 crore, you are mandatorily required to file the return. For foreign travel for yourself or any other person, you spend more than 2 lakh, you are compulsory required to file the return. Or in a year, if your electricity expenses is more than 1 lakh, you are mandatorily required to file the return. Now question is that, sir, what is the due date of return filing? So due date of return filing for CWA, 3 people, CWA, C for company, W for working partner of the firm, and firm account are required to be audited, and A for person required to audit under Income Tax Act or under any other law. Means I can say that the audit party. So for 3 persons, C for company, W for working partner of the firm, and firm account are required to be audited, and person required to audit its books of accounts under Income Tax Act or under any other law, their due date of return filing will be the 30th September of assessment year. If any person on which transfer pricing is applicable, if transfer pricing provision is applicable, section 92E is applicable, and chartered accountant is required to file the transfer pricing audit report under form number 3 CEB, for that person your due date of return filing will be 30th November, and all other assessee due date of return filing will be 31st July of assessment year. So what I am saying that CWA person 30th September, transfer pricing 30th November, and other person 31st July. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to section 139(1)(a). 139(1)(a) says that employee has the option that employee can file his return to the employer, and employer will file all return to the income tax department within that particular prescribed time limit. So here Like employee have the option that either employee can directly file the return to the income tax department, or employee can file return to the employer, and employer can file that all return in the floppy disk or in the hard disk or in pen drive to the income tax department. That concept is called a bulk return, but nowadays there is no concept of bulk return in the practical life. Now next section is section 139(1)(c). 139(1)(c) says that central government has the power that central government can through notification can exempt certain class of person to filing the return. Means central government have the power that through notification central government can exempt certain class of person to file the return itself. And central government issued one notification. That notification number is 55/2019. Now this notification says that all people just pay attention. This notification says that all people just pay attention. If any investment fund is located in the IFSC, IFSC means International Financial Service Center. If any investment fund, that investment fund is located in the IFSC, and investment fund is having non-resident foreign company unit holder, and investment fund is giving income to the non-resident foreign company unit holder, and investment fund is already deducted the TDS under section 194 LBB, and the TDS is paid to government. In that case, that non-resident foreign company is not required to file the return. What I am saying that if investment fund is located in the IFSC, that is International Financial Service Center, now investment fund is having the unit holder, that is non-resident foreign company, they are paying income to the non-resident foreign company, and on that income they already deducted the TDS and paid to the government. In that case, that non-resident foreign company is not required to file the return if non-resident foreign company don't have any other income in India. But suppose if they are having other income in India and due to that they are required to file the return in India, then obviously they have to file the return in India. Now try to understand one more thing. Suppose to that non-resident and foreign company, if any notice is issued under section 142(1), or notice is issued under section 148, or notice is issued under section 153A, 153C, in that case that not resident or foreign company is required to file the return in India. Now next section is related to 139(3), is related to loss return. Now question is that suppose sir there is a loss in current year, then also you required to file the return. Answer is yes, you have to file the return in case of loss also, because there is an interference of section 80. Section 80 from the set up and carry forward section. Section 80 says that if there is a loss under the head PGBP or under the head capital gain or loss from owning and maintaining resources. What I am saying that if there is a loss under the head PGBP, loss under the head capital gain or loss from owning and maintaining resources, then for that year you have to file the return on the time, otherwise that losses cannot be carried forward. My question is that all people please pay attention. Section 80 says that if there is a loss under the head PGBP, under the head capital gain or under owning and maintaining resources, that losses cannot be carried forward if you file the late return. Now my question is that can you set off the losses or not? Answer is yes, you can set off the losses, but you cannot carry forward the losses. Now try to understand, suppose there is a loss in current year, you have filed the return on the time in the current year, you carry forward that loss. Now in the next year when you are setting off that loss, that time you file the late return. Question is that you can set off that losses or not? Answer is yes, you can set off that losses. So guys, try to understand that return file on the time in case of the losses, that condition is applicable only for the year in which losses are incurred. Only for the year in which losses are incurred or losses are sustained. In any year in which you are just claiming that losses, in that year there is no need to file the return on the time. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand one more thing, sir. Suppose if there is a loss under the head house property or owning or loss under the head house property or unabsorbed depreciation. What I am saying that loss under the head house property or unabsorbed depreciation, that can be carried forward even you file the late return. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand, suppose if you have filed the late return due to some genuine reason. Due to some genuine reason, like suppose there is a death at assessee's home or assessee, like someone infected by corona and all, that can be a genuine reason, and you file the late return. Question is that can you ask CBDT to condone the delay and carry forward the losses? Answer is yes. There is a one CBDT circular. CBDT circular says that suppose due to genuine reason, if you have filed the late return and there is a case of losses, in that case you can request to CBDT for condone of that particular delay. Now question is that sir, you will apply to whom? So basically, suppose your return loss is up to 10 lakh, you have to apply to CIT or PCIT. If your return loss is more than 10 lakh up to 50 lakh, you have to apply to the CCIT or PCCIT. Your return loss is more than 50 lakh, you have to apply to the CBDT. Now next point is related to section 139(4), is related to belated return. Now question is that suppose assessee is not able to file the return, he fails to file the return up to the due date of return filing, can he file the belated return? Answer is yes, he can file the belated return. But sir, what is the time limit of belated return? The time limit of belated return will be till the end of the relevant assessment year or before completion of assessment, whichever is earlier. What I am saying that he can file the belated return. He can file the belated return within end of the relevant assessment year or before completion of assessment, whichever is earlier. Within the end of the relevant assessment year or before completion of assessment, whichever is earlier. Now question is that any person is filed the belated return, that what can be consequences with that particular person. First consequence is, you know that if you file the late return and if there is a tax payable, then you have to pay the interest under section 234A. You have to pay the interest under section 234A. Also there is a fees under section 234F is applicable, that is 5,000, 10,000 or 1,000. If you file the late return and if you file the return up to 31st December of assessment year, you have to pay the fees of 5,000. Suppose if you file the return after 31st December, then your fees will be 10,000. But suppose if your net taxable income is not more than the 5 lakh rupees, then your fees can be maximum 1,000. But guys, this fees is applicable only if you required to file the return and you have filed the late return. You got my point or not? Yes. Now third part. Suppose if you file the late return, in that case what will happen? Because suppose if there are case of the losses, that losses cannot be carried forward. There is one more section, that is section 80AC in the deduction topic. And section 80AC says that suppose you are claiming any income based deduction and you are filing late return, then that income based deduction is not available. Now try to understand in the refund also, section 244A. And that refund, this section, that section says that suppose if you file the return on time and there is a refund case, you will get the interest from 1st April of assessment year till the date of the refund. But suppose if you file the late return, in that case you will get the interest from the date on which you file the return till the date of the granting the refund. So what I am saying that suppose you file the return on the time, then you will get the interest from the 1st April of assessment year till the date of the refund. But suppose if you file the late return, in that case you will get the interest only from the date on which you file the return till the date on which you will get the refund. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next section is related to 139.5, that is a revised return. Now question is that suppose you have filed the return under section 139.1, 139.3, 139.5. Can you revise that return? Answer is yes. If there is any mistake on that return, in that case you can revise the return. Sir, what is the time limit of revised return? Revised return time limit is same time limit whatever we have discussed under section 139.4, that is till the end of the relevant assessment year or before completion of assessment, whichever is earlier. Till the end of the relevant assessment year or before completion of assessment, whichever is earlier. Till the end of the relevant assessment year or before completion of assessment, whichever is earlier. Now question is that belated return can also be revised or not? Answer is yes, you can revise the belated return. Sir, question is that suppose we got the refund, we got the intimation. After intimation also, can we revise the return? Answer is yes. After getting the intimation or refund, you can revise the return, no problem at all. Now suppose sir, we got the scrutiny notice, scrutiny assessment notice. We got the scrutiny assessment notice. Can we revise the return after that also? Answer is yes, you can revise the return, because scrutiny notice is not a completion of assessment. But suppose a scrutiny assessment order is passed, after that obviously you cannot revise the return. Now try to understand, whenever you revise the original return, then original return will replace by revised return in all aspect. What I am saying that your original return will be replaced by revised return in all aspect except date of filing of return. So whenever you file the revised return, always date of filing of return will be considered of the original return only. Whenever you file the revised return, your date of filing of return will be considered of the original return only. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to that. Sir, question is that how many times we can revise the return? Answer is you can revise the return n number of times within that particular time limit. Now next section is related to 139.9, is a defective return. Now this section says that suppose you file the return but return is not filed in the prescribed form, or whatever prescribed annexure you have not filled in, or suppose whatever tax you paid but challan number you have not attached in that particular return, or tax audit report not attached in that return. In that case your return will be treated as the defective return. Department will issue you the notice under section 139.9 and they will ask you to rectify that particular defect within the 15 days. Suppose if you want the extension, department can give you the extension also, but within the 15 days or extended time you have not rectified your defect, in that case your return will be treated as invalid return. And here invalid return means you have not filed the return at all. Here invalid return means you have not filed the return at all. Now next section is related to 139.4a. 139.4a says that trust is required to file the return or not. So guys, try to understand trust. Before claiming exemption under section 11 and 12, what I am saying that before claiming exemption under section 11 and 12, if trust income is more than basic exemption, they have to file the return. So suppose gross receipt of the trust, like Balaji Trust, gross receipt is 1000 crore. Now 1000 crore is totally exempt. Their GTI is nil, NTI is nil. Is they required to file the return or not? Answer is yes, because before claiming exemption, their income is more than 2,50,000. Trust is required to file the return. Now suppose if trust file the late return, what will be the due date of trust? The due date of trust will be the September, because trust trust account are required to be audited. So due date will be the September. In that case, suppose trust file the late return, then obviously 234F fees is applicable, as well as there is one section 272A, and the section 272A says that 100 rupees penalty for the each day of the default. Suppose trust file the return after 10 days, then obviously for 10 days every day 100 rupees penalty under section 272A is also applicable in case of the trust. Now next section is related to 139.4B. 139.4B is related to political party. Is political party is required to file the return? Answer is yes. A political party, before claiming exemption under section 13A, if their income is more than basic exemption, political party is required to file the return. Now political party also required to audit their books of accounts, so their due date will be the 30th September. If political party file the late return, then obviously there is a 234F fees, that 5,000, 10,000 or 1,000 is applicable. After that, section 139.4C says that return of certain hospital, institution and all. So there are certain hospitals, certain institution, mutual fund, infrastructure fund, as well as venture capital company, venture capital fund, research association, news agency, trade union, investor protection fund, and fund for the welfare of employee and their dependent, core settlement guarantee fund. This basically funds are their income are exempted under section 10 under a special section. Now question is that is they required to file the return or not? Answer is yes, before claiming the exemption. Before claiming the exemption under section 10, if their income is more than basic exemption, they are also required to file the return. Suppose if they file the late return, then obviously 234F, that 5,000, 10,000 and 1,000 fees is applicable, as well as here also 272A fees, 272A penalty of 100 rupees each day default is applicable. Means in case of the trust also, as well as in case of this institution, if return is filed late, in that case 100 rupees for every day they are required to pay the penalty. Now next section is related to 139.4D. 139.4D is related to the there are some research institution. You know that in section 35 we have discussed that if you whenever you made the donation to the research association, institute, college, university, you will get the deduction. Now guys, try to understand for their research institution or institute, college, university, their income is also exempt, but they are compulsorily required to file the return. So whatever scientific research association, social and statistical research association, institute, college and university, they are mandatorily required to file the return. After that, section 139.4E is related to business trust. Business trust is mandatorily required to file the return, and 4F is related to investment fund. Investment fund is also mandatorily required to file the return. So guys, try to understand here. In section 139.4A is related to trust, political party and certain hospital, institution and all. They are required to file the return only before claiming exemption. Their income is more than basic exemption. But last 3%, that is the scientific research association, college, university and all, and business trust, investment fund, they are mandatorily required to file the return. After that, section 140 is related to verification of return or signing of return. Sir, question is that suppose individual file the return, who will verify his return? Obviously that individual himself will verify that return. But suppose individual is not available in India, or individual is mentally not capable to verify the return, in that case any person competent on behalf of that individual, like legal here and all, they will verify the return. In case of HUF, Karta will verify the return, but suppose Karta is not available in India or Karta is not a sound mind, in that case any member can verify the return, but member should be we should not be minor, major member should verify the return. In case of the partnership firm, obviously managing partner will verify, but there is no managing partner, then any partner can verify, but that partner should not be minor. In case of the LLP, designated partner will verify, but designated partner is not available, in that case any other partner can verify. In case of the company, managing director, but suppose there is no managing director, then any other director. If company is under the liquidation, then liquidator will verify the return. And for any company, if any company application for corporate insolvency and resolution process is admitted, in that case whatever insolvency professional appointed by the adjudicating authority, that person will verify the return. In case of the political party, CEO of the political party will verify the return. In case of the local authority, principal officer will verify the return. And in case of any other person competent to verify the return, that person will verify the return. Now try to understand all people, if return was not verified, in that case that return will be treated as invalid return. Invalid return means that return is not filed at all. You know that there is a time limit of I think 120 days, and within that particular time limit you have to verify the return, otherwise your return will be treated as invalid. Now try to understand next part. Next part is related to the 139AA, that is the Aadhaar number. 139AA, this section says that Aadhaar number. Now try to understand, if any person is applying for PAN number or filing the return on or after 1st July 2017, what I am saying that if any person applying for PAN or filing the return on or after 1st July 2017, that person, if that person is eligible to opt the Aadhaar number, he has to mention his Aadhaar number in that return and that PAN application form. But suppose on that date he is not having the Aadhaar number, but he is having the Aadhaar number acknowledgement ID. He applied for Aadhaar card and he is having the Aadhaar number acknowledgement ID. Then that acknowledgement ID should be mentioned in that PAN application form, then PAN application form or return filing. Now try to understand, if any person is having already holding the PAN on 1st July 2017, that person has to link his PAN with Aadhaar within the time limit prescribed by the government. Now government, you know that they prescribe earlier time limit till 31st March 2019. After that they have extended and all, you know that they have extended and all. After that they extended to 30th June 2020, and you know that now they have extended to 31st March 2020. So within that particular time limit they have to link your Aadhaar with the PAN. Suppose you have not linked your Aadhaar with the PAN, in that case your PAN will become the inoperative. Your PAN will become the inoperative, your PAN card will be invalid. You can say that your PAN will become the inoperative. Now try to understand, this section is not applicable, like linking and all, this section is not applicable to 4 person. If any person is residing in the state of the Jammu and Kashmir, Meghalaya and Assam, if any person is staying in the Jammu and Kashmir, Meghalaya and Assam, that section is not applicable. One more thing, if any person is a non-resident as per Income Tax Act, this section is not applicable. If any person is not a citizen of India, this section is not applicable. And if any person is having the age of 80 years or more in the previous year, then also this section is not applicable. Means any person is having the age of 80 years or more, that time there is no need to link with Aadhaar and PAN. He should link himself to the God and all, like you know that pray to God, and also like there is no need to link your Aadhaar and PAN and all. All people. Now next section is related to 139A, related to PAN number. Now question is that, sir, who is required to apply for PAN? Means person, like who should hold the PAN? So guys, there are 5 people, that 5 people should hold the PAN. First, if any person, his income is basic, more than basic exemption. If any person income is more than basic exemption, then he should hold the PAN and he should apply till 31st May of assessment year. Means suppose in this previous year your income is more than 2,50,000 till in assessment year till 31st May, you should apply for the PAN. Second, if your turnover or gross receipt is more than 5 lakh, if your turnover or gross receipt is more than 5 lakh, in that case you have to apply for PAN till 31st March of previous year itself. So suppose in the current year your income, gross turnover or gross receipt is likely to be more than 5 lakh, in that case you have to apply for PAN till 31st March 2020 in the 1920 previous year. Now next part, that is the section 139. 139, it's not a 139 1A basically. Here this is the 139 trust. 139, that is the trust required under section we discussed, that is 4A. So trust 4A, it's not 1A, it's 4A. If you have compact, then just change that. Okay, so what I am saying that for trust return is mandatory. Like for trust PAN is mandatory. So if there is any trust, that trust is required to obtain the PAN number and they have to apply till the end of the previous year. Now next part, if any resident person other than individual, and they are going to enter into the financial transaction, and in a year if financial transaction is 2,50,000 or more, they are required to obtain the PAN, and date of applying the PAN is the 31st May of the assessment year. Till 31st May of the assessment year, they have to apply for the PAN. And last part, if any person is a managing director or partner or trustee or author or founder or karta or CEO or principal officer or office bearer for a person referred in point number 4. Point number 4 means that person, if any person is entering into the financial transaction and that is 2,50,000 or more, they are required to apply for the PAN. In that case, whatever partner or director or trustee or author and all of this particular person, that is also, they are also required to apply for the PAN, and date of applying the PAN is the 31st May of the assessment year. So what I am saying that all people please pay attention. There are basically 5 people. There are basically 5 persons, they are required to apply for the PAN. First is, if any person, your income is more than basic exemption, you have to apply for PAN till 31st May of assessment year. If your turnover in the current year is more than 5 lakh or gross receipt is more than 5 lakh, you have to apply for PAN till the end of this previous year. Trust, charitable religious trust, they are required to apply for PAN till the end of this previous year. And if any resident person other than individual, they are entering into any financial transaction and in the previous year that financial transaction is 2,50,000 or more, they are required to apply for PAN. And any managing partner, director and all of that person referred in point number 4, they are also required to apply for PAN. You got my point or not? Yes. After that, there are certain transactions where you have to quote your PAN number. Like suppose you are purchasing or selling any motor vehicle other than two-wheeler, you have to quote your PAN and all. Now next part is related to PAN and Aadhaar interchangeable. PAN and Aadhaar interchangeable. So Nirmala Sitharaman ji made one amendment, and Nirmala Sitharaman ji is saying that suppose you don't have the PAN. all people just pay attention. Suppose you don't have the pen, but you have Aadhaar number, and you are going to enter into some transaction where pen is required, pen is mandatory. You just quote your Aadhaar number. You can quote your Aadhaar number. Here department will presume that you applied for the pen, and department will automatically allot you the pen number. What I am saying, that all people please pay attention. Suppose you don't have any pen, you don't have pen card, but you are having the Aadhaar number. Now you are entering into some transaction where pen is required. You can quote simply your Aadhaar number. It is sufficient, no problem at all. But whenever you will quote your Aadhaar number, here department will presume that you apply for pen, and department will automatically allot you the pen number. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part. Suppose you have already linked your pen with Aadhaar. You have already linked your pen with Aadhaar. In that case, you can quote your Aadhaar number instead of the pen number. You can quote your Aadhaar number instead of the pen number. And after that, our lawmakers also changed the rule number 114, and rule number 144, they made the amendment, and they are saying that suppose if any person is not having the pen number, that person is having the Aadhaar number, he quoted the Aadhaar number, then department will automatically issue him the pen number. And one more point, suppose if any person is having the Aadhaar number, he don't have the pen number, then he can just quote his Aadhaar number. He can apply for pen number through only Aadhaar number. There is no need to submit any fresh document, and without any other document other than Aadhaar number, you can opt your pen number. And you know that now they made the scheme within 20 minutes you can get your pen number without paying any fees and all. Okay, so now next part is related to 139B, is related to the TRP, that is called tax return preparer. Now guys, try to understand, tax return preparer is a person who filed the return, means who help people to file the return. Now try to understand, question is that, sir, who can be a tax return preparer? So any individual person can be a tax return preparer, but guys, try to understand, chartered accountant cannot be a TRP, an advocate, that is legal practitioner, cannot be a TRP, any bank manager cannot be a TRP, or any employee of a specified class of person, that cannot be a TRP. Now try to understand, question is that who can file the return through TRP? Any specified class of person can file the return through TRP. What is the meaning of a specified class of person? Any person who required to file the return, but other than company and audit party, any company and person required to audit its books of accounts under Income Tax Act or under any other law. These two person are not a specified class of person, other person are a specified class of person, so other person can file their return through TRP, but company and audit party cannot file their return through TRP. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to section 139C. 139C is related to annexure-less return. Now this section says that CBDT has the power, CBDT can make such rules. In that rules, they can call the return without any documentation or report and all. So nowadays, you know that suppose you are you have deposited some amount in the LIC and all. So at the time of filing of return, you attach that receipt of LIC and all. Answer is no, you will not attach. That is called annexure-less. You file the return, but you have not attached any documentation and all. But whenever at the time of assessment, if assessing officer call that documentation, then you have to submit that documentation that is mentioned in section 139D. Now next section is related to section 148, that is the self-assessment tax. Now this section says that before filing of return, whatever tax due on your income, along with the interest, along with the fees, but after taking credit of your TDS, TCS, advance tax, MAT credit, AMT credit, all rebate, relief and all, whatever remaining tax amount along with your interest, along with the fees, you have to pay to the government before filing of return. Now guys, try to understand, suppose your payment is short, suppose your tax payment is short, in that case, first it will be adjusted against fees, second it will be adjusted against interest, and third it will be adjusted against tax. I can take an example, suppose my tax was 1 lakh, my interest was 10,000 and my fees was 5,000. So total was 1,15,000. 1,15,000 I required to pay. Suppose I have paid only 50,000. So out of 50,000, first 5,000 will adjust towards the fees, 10,000 will adjust towards the interest, and remaining 35,000 will adjust towards the taxes. You got my point or not? Yes. So this is the completion of first part of topic, that is what assessee is supposed to do. So basically assessee is required to file the return and all. Now we will start that what department will do in response to whatever return filed by assessee. Yes people, now we are going to start with the next part, that is the section 142.1 is related to the RIA notice. We will call it RIA notice, R for return, I for information, A for account. R for return, that is the section 142 subsection 1 clause 1. Now 142.1 says that suppose assessee not file the return up to the due date of return filing, in that case department has the power that department can send you the notice and they can ask for return. Now next section is the section 142.12. 142.12 is related to information and account. If department wants some information from you from account, account from you, then they can send you the notice under section 142(1)(2), and they can ask for information and account. Now question is that they can ask the which kind of information, like any information related to the asset and liability that is not included in your books of accounts. Is they can ask information related to that also? Answer is yes, they can ask. But guys, if they are asking the information related to the asset that is not included in your books of accounts, for that assessing officer need the approval of the joint commissioner. If joint commissioner will approve to the assessing officer, then only assessing officer can ask that type of detail. Otherwise assessing officer will not ask that type of detail. Now next part is related to the books of accounts. They can ask for books of accounts, but sir, what is the time limit? Like how many years books of accounts they can ask? So they can ask the books of accounts for maximum 3 previous year before the previous year for which they are going to make the assessment. So suppose they are going to make the assessment for the previous year 18-19 and before 3 years accounts they can ask under section 142(2). You got my 142(1)(2). So this section 142(1) is related to the RIA notice, that is written information and account. Now question is that sir, what is the time limit to issue this notice? Answer is there is no time limit to issue this particular notice. Now try to understand sir, suppose assessee not cooperated with this particular notice, assessee not complied with this notice, then what will happen? So if assessee not complied with 142(1), then there are two consequences. First, 272A section apply and 10,000 rupees penalty is applicable, as well as the assessing officer can complete the assessment under section 144, that is the best judgment assessment. After that, next section is section 142(2)A is related to a special audit, or I can say that audit by the department. Now try to understand, suppose assessing officer, who can be assessing officer? Joint commissioner, assistant commissioner, deputy commissioner and ITO. So suppose assessing officer is making assessment of any assessee, and during the assessment, suppose if assessing officer think that your books of accounts is very complex. Now what is the meaning of complex? Complexity means suppose your books of accounts volume is very high, or suppose nature of business is something different, or suppose there is a complexity or doubt about the correctness of your books of accounts, or suppose there are multiplication of entries in your books of accounts. In that case, assessing officer has the power that he can give the direction to assessee for the special audit. But guys, before giving the direction, first he will send you the show cause notice, give it the opportunity of being heard, and after opportunity of being heard only he will give the direction of the special audit. But guys, try to understand, before giving the direction of a special audit, here assessing officer has to take the approval either from CIT, CCIT, PCIT or PCCIT. Means from CIT, CCIT, PCIT or PCCIT, from that first assessing officer will take the approval, and after that he will give the direction to assessing direction to assessee to get his accounts as a special audit. Now question is that who can do the special audit? So obviously special audit has to be done by the chartered accountant. So chartered accountant will conduct the special audit, but who will nominate the chartered accountant? So chartered accountant will be nominated by the CIT, PCIT, CCIT or PCCIT. Means CIT, CCIT, PCIT or PCCIT, they will nominate the chartered accountant, and chartered accountant will complete the special audit. Now sir, what is the time limit to completion of special audit? That time limit that assessing officer will give in that particular notice. Normally he will give 60 days, 70 days, 80 days in that particular notice only. Within that particular time you have to complete your special audit. Now try to understand, sir, suppose if that is not possible to complete the special audit, then in that particular time limit, in that case, question is that it can be extended or not? Answer is yes, it can be extended. Either it can be extended by the assessing officer on the own motion, or suppose application is made by assessee or application is made by chartered accountant, it can be extended. But guys, try to understand total time limit. Total time limit means original plus extended should not be more than 180 days. Original plus extended should not be more than 180 days. Original plus extended should not be more than 180 days. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand one more thing. Sir, who will pay the remuneration of chartered accountant? Chartered accountant remuneration will be paid by central government. Central government will pay the remuneration of chartered accountant. Now try to understand, here assessee will submit the special audit report to the assessing officer, and assessing officer will consider that report. But before considering that report, before giving the effect of that report in the assessment, he has to give an opportunity of being heard to assessee, and after giving opportunity of being heard, here assessing officer will complete the assessment in accordance with the special audit report. Now question is that, suppose sir, your account were already audited under Income Tax Act or under Companies Act or under any other law, then also is you required to Do again your audit as a special audit? Answer is yes. If direction is given for the special audit, you require to audit your books of accounts under special audit. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand one more thing. Special audit can be for a particular year or for a 6-month period or particular segment of books also. Suppose assessing officer wants to audit only your sales side of your books, then can he give the direction for only sales? Answer is yes, he can give the direction for only sales. Now try to understand, suppose if assessee not cooperated in the special audit, in that case there is two consequences. One is obviously your assessment will be completed under the bad judgment assessment and 10,000 rupees penalty under section 272A. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to 142A. 142A says that during the assessment, suppose if assessing officer wants to value any property, assessing officer wants to check the fair market value of any property, investment or asset, in that case he may transfer your case to the valuation officer. Valuation officer will find out the value of that particular asset, and after that valuation officer will send his report to the assessee as well as assessing officer. Now question is that what is the time limit of valuation officer? Valuation officer will send the report to the assessing officer within 6 months from the end of the month in which reference was made. What I am saying that within 6 months from the end of the month in which reference was made, by assessing officer, means within 6 months he will send his report to the assessing officer and assessee. Now try to understand here, valuation officer report is not binding to assessing officer. If assessing officer wants to consider, then he can consider, otherwise he can ignore also. Means normally in the practical life, what happen, if there is a substantial differences, then assessing officer will consider, otherwise he may ignore that valuation officer report. Now guys, try to understand in transfer pricing that TPO report is mandatory. Whatever TPO order, that is a mandatory to that is a binding to the assessing officer, but here valuation officer report is not binding to the assessing officer. Now next section is related to section 143(1) is a processing of return. Processing of return, or I can say that the intimation. Guys, whenever you file the return, then obviously there is a XML file. That XML file generated and that XML file sent to the Bangalore. In Bangalore, income tax department is having one software, and they will put that XML file in software, and their software will change 5 things. Software will make the 5 changes. Suppose if there is any arithmetic error, they will change that. Second, if there is an incorrect claim, they will change that. Third, suppose your return is filed late and you are claiming some income based deduction like 10 AA, 80, IA, 80, IB, 80, IAB, 80, IC, 80, ID, 80, IE, then they will disallow that particular deduction. Now suppose if any expenditure is disallowed in the tax audit report, but you have not disallowed in your return of income, they will disallow that expenditure. And one more, suppose you are filing the return, in that you are claiming some losses, and you are claiming the losses for the year in which you have filed the late return. Suppose last year you have filed the late return, and from that year there are losses, so obviously that losses cannot be carried forward, but then also people claim that type of losses, so they will disallow that losses. So what I am saying that in intimation department can change the 5 things. First, there is an arithmetic error. If there is an arithmetic error, they will change that. Second is an incorrect claim, they will change that. Third, if return is filed late and deduction is claimed income based deduction, they will disallow that. If any expenditure is disallowed in the tax audit report but not disallowed in the return of income, they will disallow that. After that, suppose if return is filed and you are claiming some losses, and losses belongs to the year for which return was not filed on the time, in that case is that loss will be disallowed. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand, after doing this particular changes, whenever department is making this changes, first they will intimate you. Online. You know that we get that intimation of acceptance and rejection. Means whatever changes they made, you can accept, you can reject, you can give reason and all. So you will get the time of 30 days to respond that. If you give the response, they will consider that. Suppose if you are not give the response, then also it is okay. After that, department will send you the final intimation. And final intimation has to be sent within 1 year from the end of the financial year in which return was filed. So what is the time limit to sending the intimation? Intimation has to be sent within 1 year from the end of the financial year in which return was filed. So suppose return is filed in the current financial year, then within 1 year they will send you the intimation. Now try to understand one more thing. Sir, question is that is intimation department will send you intimation in every case? Now as per the law, they are saying that intimation has to be sent only if there is a refund, or only if there is a tax payable, or if there is a changes in the losses. But in the practical life, obviously you are going to get the 100% cases intimation. In the practical life, in the 100% cases, you are going to get the intimation. Now try to understand, suppose if you have not received the intimation, then whatever return file at the time of whatever return file that time you got one acknowledgement generated at the time of return filing, that will be treated as the deemed intimation, now question is that suppose sir, if you receive the scrutiny notice, means scrutiny notice is already served to you, then also is intimation is mandatory or not? Earlier that was not mandatory, but by Finance Act 2017, means from assessment year 17-18, now it is a mandatory. Even you receive the scrutiny notice, they send you the scrutiny notice, then also intimation is mandatory, because intimation, you know, the intimation income is required for the calculation of under reporting or misreporting of income, also under the penalty topic. So under the penalty topic, whatever income increase after intimation, that will be treated as your under reporting income or misreporting income. So for that purpose, they are saying that here, all people please pay attention. Here they are saying that suppose you receive the scrutiny notice, then also intimation is mandatory. They will send you the intimation is mandatory, even you receive the scrutiny notice. But guys, whenever they will send the intimation, but there is one section for the assessing officer, and they are saying that suppose if assessing officer have some doubt about the recovery of taxes and there is a case of refund, then they will send you the intimation, but they can hold the refund. They can hold your refund up to the completion of assessment. So they will send you the intimation is mandatory, but they can hold your refund till the completion of assessment. Now next section is related to 143.2 and 143.3 is related to the scrutiny assessment. Now, for making the scrutiny, they will send you the notice under section 143.2. 143.2 is a notice of the scrutiny. Now, question is that, sir, what is the time limit to send or receive of a scrutiny notice? So here, lawmaker says that scrutiny notice has to be served. They use the word serve. Serve means received by SSC. Has to be served to the SSC within 6 months from the end of the financial year in which return was filed. What I am saying that scrutiny notice has to be served within 6 months from the end of the financial year in which return was filed. So suppose if you receive the scrutiny notice, after that assessing officer will that call for some information from you. He will gather some evidences and all, and after that he will complete the assessment under section 143.3. Now in 143.3 they will complete the assessment and they will pass the assessment order under section 143.3. Now question is that, sir, what is the time limit to complete the assessment under section 143.3? That time limit is given in under section 153.1. That time limit is given under section 153.1, and 153.1 says that scrutiny assessment completion time limit earlier was 21 months from the end of the relevant assessment year, but for assessment year 18-19, that is 18 months from the end of the relevant assessment year, but from assessment year 19-20 onwards, now this time limit is 12 months from the end of the relevant assessment year. So you should remember that 12 months from the end of the relevant assessment year is your time limit for the assessment completion. After that, next part, suppose all people please pay attention. What happens? Assessing officer is making some assessment, that is a scrutiny assessment, and during the assessment he got to know that some institution, hospital and trust and fund and all, they are not complied with some condition, and all. There is a contravention of condition. So can he withdraw the exemption? Answer is no. He has to intimate to central government about the contravention. He has to intimate to prescribe authority or central government about contravention, and he has to wait for the notification of central government or prescribe authority. Suppose in notification they are saying that yes, you should withdraw that exemption, then obviously assessing officer has to withdraw that exemption. Otherwise assessing officer has to bound to give the exemption to that particular institution or hospital and all. Now next section is related to 143.3a, 3b and 3c. They are saying that like central government will come with the faceless assessment, or I can say that the e-assessment. For e-assessment procedure is already given at the end of your compact. So there are basically 15-16 page, just you have to read once. There are basically, that in e-assessment just you have to remember 2-3 things. One is the NEC, that is National E-Assessment Center. National E-Assessment Center is having various RAC, that is a Regional E-Assessment Center. Now in every Regional E-Assessment Center there are 4 units. One is the assessment unit, one is the verification unit, one is the your review unit, and one is your technical unit. So basically there are 4 units in the RAC, and RAC in NEC there are various RAC. In RAC there will be 4 units. One is the assessment unit and all, that is called e-assessment scheme, and e-assessment scheme is given in your book at the last pages. If you want to check, then you can check that e-assessment scheme. You got my point or not? Now next part is related to 144, that is the bad judgment assessment, or I can say that the ex parte assessment. Now bad judgment assessment is possible when assessee is not cooperative with department. You are not complying with department, you are not cooperating with department, then department can go for the bad judgment assessment. Now bad judgment assessment is possible in the 4 cases. Suppose RIA notice is issued, that is 142.1 notice is issued and assessee not complied with that. Second, if assessee not filed the return under section 139.1, 139.4 and 139.5, then bad judgment assessment is possible. Or suppose assessee is not complied with the special audit direction. A special audit direction was given by the assessing officer, assessee not complied with the special audit direction, or suppose a scrutiny notice was issued to the assessee and assessee is not complied with the scrutiny notice, in that case bad judgment assessment is possible. So what I am saying that bad judgment assessment is possible in the four cases. First, assessee not filed the return under section 139(1), 139(4), 139(5). Second, assessee not complied with the RIA notice, that is 142(1) notice. Assessee not complied with the special audit direction, and assessee not complied with the scrutiny notice, in that case bad judgment assessment is possible. Now question is that, sir, how bad judgment assessment will be completed by assessing officer? Is assessing officer will complete your bad judgment assessment like akkad bakkad bambe bo 80 90 pura 100, your income is 10 crore. So is he will make the bad judgment assessment on the arbitrary manner or ad hoc basis? Answer is no. He will take some scientific basis, some rational basis, on scientific rational basis, best of his knowledge basis, he will complete your bad judgment assessment. Now guys, try to understand, sir, what is the time limit to complete the bad judgment assessment? So bad judgment assessment completion time limit is given under section 153(1) only, that is 12 months from the end of the relevant assessment year. 12 months from the end of the relevant assessment year. But for assessment year 18-19, that is 18 months, and earlier it was 21 month. Now try to understand, before making the bad judgment assessment, assessing officer has to give first show cause notice and has to give opportunity of being heard. Means before making the bad judgment assessment, assessing officer will give you the opportunity of being heard, and only after giving the opportunity of being heard, he will complete the bad judgment assessment. But suppose if assessing officer already issued you the 142(1) notice, 142(1), that is the RIA notice, in that case there is no need to give the opportunity of being heard, and directly he can complete the bad judgment assessment. Now next part is related to 144(a), that is related to power of joint commissioner to issue the direction. Now try to understand, suppose if your assessing officer is a ACDC or ITO, that is assistant commissioner, deputy commissioner, or ITO, and your assessment is pending with the ACDC and ITO, and suppose ACDC and ITO is not behaving good with you, and he is saying that I will disallow that expenditure and all, you are not satisfied with the ACDC ITO, in that case assessee have the option that assessee can make the application to the joint commissioner. Okay sir, your subordinate assessing officer is doing that thing and all. Here joint commissioner have the power that joint commissioner can give the direction to the assessing officer to complete the assessment in the particular manner. Or many times what happens, joint commissioner can give the direction on the own motion, or suppose assessing officer refer that case to the joint commissioner, in that case joint commissioner can also give the direction to the assessing officer. Now try to understand, question is that whatever direction given by the joint commissioner to the assessing officer, that is binding to assessing officer or not? Answer is yes, it is binding to assessing officer. So whatever direction given by the joint commissioner, that is binding to the assessing officer has to follow that particular direction. Now try to understand, if any direction is given by the joint commissioner to the assessing officer and that direction is a prejudicial to the interest of assessee, it is prejudicial, means it is basically harmful for the assessee, then before giving that direction, joint commissioner will give an opportunity of being heard to the assessee. Only after that he can give the direction to the assessing officer. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to 144(c), that is the DRP, dispute resolution panel. Now try to understand, this section says that suppose if any assessing officer is completing assessment of the two person, first person they are going to complete the assessment of the foreign company, or suppose they are making the assessment of any person and whose case was transferred to the transfer pricing officer, and due to the transfer pricing officer there is a variation in the income. So what I am saying that, suppose assessing officer is completing the assessment of foreign company, and foreign company he is going to increase the income or reducing the losses, or suppose any other person and whose case was transferred to the TPO, and due to TPO report there is income increase, like increase in income or decrease in the losses, in that case assessing officer is bound to follow this particular procedure. Now this procedure says that here assessing officer first will send the draft order to the assessee. Assessing officer will send the draft order to the assessee. Now try to understand, assessee receive the draft order within 30 days. Either assessee will accept that or assessee will file the objection. Suppose assessee accepted that, or suppose 30 days is expired and assessee has not filed his acceptance or objection. In that case, within 1 month from the end of the month, in which acceptance is received or 30 days was expired, within 1 month, assessing officer will send the final order to the assessee. But suppose assessee filed the objection to the assessing officer as well as the DRP, that is dispute resolution panel. Now guys, in DRP there is this team of 3 CIT. There is a team of 3 CIT. There are basically 3 CIT in the DRP team, and if objection is filed to DRP, now DRP will check that matter. DRP will check that draft order. DRP will call for information. DRP will ask to assessee to file some submission. They will ask some information from assessing officer and all, and after finding everything, they will give direction to the assessing officer. They will give direction to the assessing officer. Now they have to give this direction to assessing officer within 9 months. Within 9 months from the end of the month in which draft order was forwarded. So here DRP has to give the direction to assessing officer within 9 months from the end of the month in which draft order was forwarded. Now whatever direction received by assessing officer within 1 month from the end of that month, within 1 month from the end of the month in which direction was received, assessing officer will send the final order to assessee within 1 month. Means assessing officer has to pass the final order within 1 month from the end of the month in which direction was received. Now question is that whatever direction received by assessing officer is binding to the assessing officer or not? Answer is yes, that is binding to the assessing officer, because direction of the DRP are binding to the assessing officer. Now try to understand one thing. Suppose if order is made by assessing officer with the direction of DRP, if assessee is not satisfied with that order, can assessee make an appeal? Answer is yes, assessee can make appeal direct to the ITAT, that is Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. So to ITAT assessee can make the appeal if assessee is not satisfied with the order made by assessing officer with the direction of the DRP. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand. Question is that sir, DRP can increase the income or not? Suppose assessee filed the return at 1 crore. Assessing officer made the income of 1.5 crore. So here assessee, like you know that file an objection to the DRP. Now DRP can increase the income to 2 crore or not? Answer is yes. DRP can increase the variation, DRP can decrease the variation, DRP can confirm the variation. So DRP has all the power, DRP can increase the variation also. That is the concept of the DRP. Now next section is related to 145 subsection 1. Now this section says that method of accounting. Now guys, for your PGBP and your IFOS, you can follow the mercantile system or cash system, your choice. For your PGBP and IFOS, you can follow the mercantile system or cash system, your choice. Now, for other salary, house property, capital gain, there is no need of method because there is specific rules and income is taxable as per specific rules. Now, next section is 145 subsection 2 is related to the ICDS, that is Income Computation and Disclosure Standard. There are basically 10 ICDS. If you follow the accrual system of accounting, then for the purpose of computing your PGBP and IFOS income, you have to follow the ICDS. ICDS is applicable to all assessee, but it is not applicable to individual HUF who is not required to audit their books of accounts under Income Tax Act. Now, next part is related to the discretionary bad judgment assessment. Guys, try to understand in three cases. In 3 cases, assessing officer can complete your assessment in a manner provided under Section 144. Assessing officer can complete your assessment in the manner provided under Section 144. First, suppose assessee not follow the method of accounting regularly. He is not following the correct method of accounting regularly. Suppose his books of accounts and documents are not correct and complete, or assessee is not complied with the ICDS, then in 3 cases, assessing officer can complete your assessment in the manner provided under bad judgment assessment. Next section is Section 145A. 145A is related to the method of accounting in certain cases. Now, question is that, sir, how to value your closing stock? Valuation of stock. So, there are 2 parts. One is the share and security, one is the other. Suppose share and security, there are 2 parts. Share and security. First, in share and security, if shares and security are listed and quoted in recognized stock exchanges in India, if that share and security are listed and quoted in recognized stock exchanges in India, then you have to value that cost or NRV whichever is lower. Cost or NRV whichever is lower, and you have to compare cost or NRV whichever is lower by category wise, not a script wise, category wise. Category wise means suppose there are equity share, preference share, debenture, bonds, that is the category. So for equity share, just take the equity share and total cost of all equity share and total NRV of all equity share, and after that just compare. That is called your category wise valuation is there for the closing stock. Now in case of the other security, you have to take the original cost. Original cost means cost at the time of the initial recognition of that security. That will be your closing stock value. Now in case of the any other commodity, suppose you are selling the car and all, then how you will value the cost, how you will value the stock in trade? So stock in trade has to be valued at cost or NRV whichever is lower. So what I am saying that in case of the security, and security is quoted and listed in recognized stock exchange, cost or NRV whichever is lower, and that too category wise. In case of other security, you have to take the original cost. In case of any other commodity, in that case cost or NRV whichever is lower. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand guys, in the income tax, whenever you value the purchase, sales or stock, you have to take the inclusive of taxes. Always you have to consider the inclusive of taxes, means taxes should be forming part of your stock in trade and all. Now next section is related to 145B, that is related to taxability of certain income. Now this section says that there are 3 specific income that should be taxable as per this particular rule. Now this section says that first point, if any interest is received on the late compensation of compulsory acquisition of property. Suppose if you receive the late compensation on compulsory acquisition of property and you receive the interest on that, that interest will be taxable in the year in which it is received. Even you follow accrual system of accounting, then also that interest will be taxable only in the year in which it is received by you. Now try to understand one more thing. Sir, in case of the government grant will be normally taxable when all conditions are satisfied. But this section says that government grant will be taxable in the year in which it is received if it was not taxable earlier. What I am saying that government grant will be taxable in the year in which it is received if it was not taxable earlier. So in simple word, can I say that government grant will be taxable in the year of accrual or receipt, whichever is earlier? Because suppose if government grant is already accrued, then obviously it will be taxable in the year of accrual. But suppose if it is not, till now it is not accrued, condition attached to that government grant is not satisfied, in that case it will be taxable in the year of receipt. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand, in case of your export incentive like duty drawback and all, and in case of the escalation clause, it will be taxable in the year in which reasonable certainty of recovery of that amount is attained. Suppose your recovery, like in case of the escalation claim and export incentive, shall be deemed to be income of the previous year in which reasonable certainty of its realization is achieved. If reasonable certainty of its realization is achieved, in that year it will be taxable. Now next part is related to income escaping assessment. Income escaping assessment, or we can call it the reassessment or reopening of cases, section 147. Now this section is possible when there is an income escaping and assessing officer is having a reason to believe that your income is escaped for any particular assessment year. Then what will happen? All people just pay attention. So section 147 says that suppose if assessing officer is having some reason to believe means a strong reason. Now what can be a reason to believe? Reason to believe means suppose if there is a later any Supreme Court judgment, or there is a retrospective amendment in the law, or if there is a strong evidence in the possession of assessing officer that your income is escaped for assessment. In that case, assessing officer will issue you the notice under section 148. Basically, he will serve you the notice under section 148 and he will ask you to file the return in response to notice under section 148. So all people, please pay attention. If assessing officer is having a reason to believe that your income is escaped assessment, in that case, first he will record that reason in writing. And after that, he will serve the notice to the assessee under section 148 and will ask you to file the return in response to notice under section 148. Now, question is that, sir, if we already filed the return earlier, then also is we required to file the return in response to notice under section 148? Answer is yes. You have to file the return in response to notice under section 148. Now, try to understand one more thing. Sir, can assessee can demand the reason from assessing officer? Answer is yes. Assessee can demand the reason from assessing officer, but assessing officer is bound to supply that reason only after the filing the return in response to notice under section 148. So if return is filed by assessee, in that case, after filing the return, assessing officer will supply the reason to the assessee regarding the income escaping assessment. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand one more thing. Now reason to believe will not include any rumors, gossip or suspicion. Means reason to believe should have the strong evidences, and on the basis of that strong evidences, if assessing officer is think that your income is escaped for any assessment year, in that case he can open your case under section 147. Now try to understand, suppose if any assessing officer just opinion is change of opinion means, suppose earlier he has allowed some expenditure P, and now he think that expenditure P should be disallowed. So can he, on the basis of just change in opinion, he can issue section 148 notice? Answer is no, he cannot, because change in opinion is not amount to reason to believe. Next part is related to, sir, suppose for that particular assessment year, if your case is already your case, you already filed an appeal to the CIT appeal or ITAT or High Court or Supreme Court or CIT revision, and your case is already decided or pending in the higher authority, then also can AO can make the income escaping assessment for that particular year or not? Answer is whatever matter already subject matter of appeal. Other than that matter, assessing officer can make the section 147 assessment. So here basically partial merger doctrine is confirmed. Partial merger doctrine means whatever matter already decided or pending with the higher authority, other than that matter, assessing officer can make the assessment under section 147. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand, there are following also reason are treated as reason to believe for the section 147 means following also deemed to be treated as income escaping cases. First, if your income is more than basic exemption and you have not filed the return, your income is more than basic exemption, you have not filed the return, or suppose if there are foreign asset and you have not disclosed that asset in the income tax and assessing officer found that asset, in that case it is a case is deemed to be income escaping. One more thing, suppose if you have not filed the CA report under transfer pricing, that is 3CEB format, you have not submitted that report, in that case it is deemed to be income escaping case. One more thing, suppose if your income you have claimed the excessive losses or excessive deduction and all, and one more thing, suppose you have paid the less taxes, means taxes at the lower rate, that is also treated as the income escaping cases. Or suppose if assessing officer receives some information from investigation wing, and on the basis of that information assessing officer think that your income is more than basic exemption and you have not filed the return, or your income is understated or losses is over claimed and all, in that case he can make the 147. Now guys, try to understand, before making the 147 he has to issue the notice under section 148. Now question is that, sir, try to understand one more thing. Sir, reason, whatever reason he has recorded, so that reason should be a valid reason. Now try to understand one more thing. Suppose reason was valid and he got another income also, means some other income also he got to come to know in during that assessment proceeding. Can he include the other income also? Answer is yes, he can include, no problem at all. But try to understand what happens. Suppose whatever reason he was recorded, on that reason there is no addition, means that reason is invalid, but he got the other income. Can he include the other income without issuing the fresh notice and without recording the fresh reason? Answer is yes, as per the Mahik Finvest case law. As per the Punjab and Haryana High Court judgment, that is a Mahik Finvest, that case law says that even that whatever reason he recorded, that is invalid, but there is an addition of the other income, he can include that other income and he can complete the assessment without adding on that particular point. But there is a no in case of the Ranbaxy and Jet Airways judgment. Now Ranbaxy Jet Airways judgment says that here law says that that income is whatever reason recorded, that income and also other income. So if there is no that income, so also other income cannot be considered. So here in Ranbaxy case law and Jet Airways case law, Bombay and Delhi High Court is saying that on that matter, like reason should be valid, and on the basis of that, if there is an addition on that reason, in that case only they can consider the other income, otherwise they cannot consider the other income without issuing the fresh notice or without recording the fresh reason. Now question is that, sir, what is the time limit to issue or serve the notice under section 148? Now try to understand, 148 says that they have to serve you the notice, but time limit is given for the issue of the notice. Time limit is given for the issue of the notice, and as per section 149 subsection 1 says that notice has to be issued within 4 years from the end of the relevant assessment year. But suppose if your income escaping is 1 lakh or more than 1 lakh, then time limit will be the 6 year from the end of the relevant assessment year. If your income escaping is related to foreign asset, then your time limit will be 16 year from the end of the relevant assessment year. So what I am saying that, what is the time limit? 4 year from the end of the relevant assessment year. If your income escaping is 1 lakh or more than 6 years from the end of the relevant assessment year. If your income escaping is related to foreign asset, in that case 16 years from the end of the relevant assessment year. But guys, try to understand, there are basically three exception of this time limit. There are three exception of this time limit. First exception is says that suppose if notice is issued to any agent of non-resident, if notice is issued to any agent of non-resident, in that case notice can be issued only up to 6 years from the end of the relevant assessment year. One more, there is a first proviso to section 147. Now this proviso says that suppose if assessment is already made earlier under section 143.3 or 147, assessment already made under section 143.3 or 147, and assessee filed the return, whatever he required to file the return, and he disclosed everything truly and fully, and after that also there is an income escaping. In simple word, I can say that in that case, income can be escaped only due to the mistake of AO. In that case, maximum notice can be issued within 4 years from the end of the relevant assessment year, means only 4 year time limit is applicable. Even income is more than 1 lakh rupees, then also assessing officer can issue the notice only within 4 years from the end of the relevant assessment year. But guys, try to understand this, the particular proviso is not applicable in case of income escaping from the foreign asset. So in case of any income escaping from the foreign asset, in that case 16 year time limit is applicable, even there is a mistake of the assessing officer. Now there is one more section, that is the section 150. 150 says that suppose if any CIT appeal, ITAT, High Court or Supreme Court judgment came, if any CIT appeal, High Court, Supreme Court or ITAT judgment came, and due to that Due to that, if any other person income is escaped, in that case other person case can be open at any time. There is no time limit at all, means unlimited time limit assessing officer will get. So suppose I can say that, I can take one example. My case was pending with the High Court. Now today High Court gave the judgment, and due to that, suppose my wife income is escaped. In that case, my wife case can be open like 6, 7, 8, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years ago also. My wife case can be opened today on the basis of the finding or direction of that High Court judgment. But guys, this particular provision is applicable only in case when one income has to be excluded from the income of one person and include in the another person, or income excluded from one assessment year and include in the another assessment year, then only this particular provision is applicable. After that, one example and one restriction is given. You should read that example, you will able to understand. After that, there is one section, that is a section 151. 151 is related to the 151 is basically related to the like approval of the higher authority. Whenever if there is an income escaping assessment 148 notice, before issuing the notice there is a need of approval of higher authority. Now who will take the approval from whom? So basically all people please pay attention. Suppose if notice is issued within 4 years, if notice is issued within 4 years, in that case, if notice is issued by AC, DC or ITO, AC, DC or ITO, then they will take the approval of JC. If JC issued the notice, then there is no need of approval of any person. Now try to understand one more thing. If notice is issued after 4 years, but within 6 years or 16 years, in that case, every assessing officer, either assessing officer like ITO, AC, DC or JC, they should have the approval from the CIT or PCIT or CCIT or PCCIT, means they should take the approval from the higher authority. Now try to understand section 152(1) says that tax rate. Suppose income is escaping related to the assessment year 13-14, then tax rate of the 13-14 will be applicable, means respective year tax rate is applicable. Now section 152(2) is related to the dropping of assessment. Now this section says that suppose you already paid the taxes on the higher amount. Suppose you already paid the taxes on the higher amount, assessing officer made some mistake in the earlier assessment, and due to that you already paid the taxes on suppose 20 lakh. And you rightly liable to pay tax only on suppose 15 lakh, but you paid the taxes and you have not referred any appeal. Now suppose assessing officer come to know about some income escaping of the 2 lakh. Now you can request to assessing officer, sir, I have already paid the taxes on 20 lakh. Rightly, I am liable to pay tax only on the 15 lakh. Now you are having the 2 lakh rupees income escaping, so total comes to the 17 lakh. Means if you include this 2 lakh income, then also my total income will be 17 lakh. Sir, I already paid the taxes on 20 lakh. Sir, please drop my case now. So in that case, if assessing officer think, then he may drop your case. That is the section 152(2). Next section is a 153(2), that is the time limit to completion of like income escaping assessment. Sir, what is the time limit to complete the assessment? So here 147 assessment has to be completed within 9 months from the end of the financial year in which notice was served. What I am saying that 9 months from the end of the financial year in which notice was served, but try to understand if notice is served on or after 1st April 2019. 1st April 2019, in that case that 9 month will be 12 months. Miss now 12 months from the end of the financial year in which notice was served, if notice is served on or after 1st April 2019. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand all people. Whenever assessing officer issue the notice under section 148, then you have to file the return in response to notice under section 148. Whenever you will file the notice, whenever you will file the return in response to notice under section 148, after that assessing officer will serve you the notice under section 143(2), that is the called scrutiny notice. Now that notice has to be served. That notice has to be served within 6 months from the end of the financial year in which return was filed in response to notice under section 148. This is basically a practical scenario, and there is a one case law of the Blue Moon Supreme Court judgment and Blue Moon case law. They have said that they have pronounced that Supreme Court is saying that this is basically practical scenario. Okay, whenever you file the return in response to notice under section 148, after that department has to issue the notice under section 143(2), and that should be within 6 months from the end of the financial year in which return was filed in response to notice under section 148. If they serve notice after some time, means after 6 months they serve the notice, then 147 assessment is completed. Sorry, 147 assessment will be like a invalid assessment if they have not served the notice under section 143(2) within that 6 months. Now guys, whenever they will complete the assessment, they will on that assessment order they will write that assessment completed under section 143(3), but it is read with section 147. This is basically practical scenario. In the practical life they do that particular thing. Now next section is 154. 154 is related to the rectification of mistake. Now try to understand any income tax authority passed any assessment order or intimation, and if there is a mistake apparent on record in that order or intimation. Mistake apparent on record means if any mistake where two plausible views are not possible, means two views are not possible. Suppose they made 2 plus 2 is 5, obviously it should be 4. So here two plausible views are not possible, that is called mistake apparent on record. Here you can go for the rectification. Now guys, try to understand rectification can be done by the own motion also department, and you can also make an application for the rectification. There is no fees, no form. Nowadays online you can make the application for rectification. Now question is that, sir, what is the time limit of rectification? What is the time limit? Means till what time they will rectify the order? So here time limit for rectification is 4 years from the end of the financial year in which order sought to be rectified was passed. 4 years from the end of the financial year in which order containing mistake was the passed. Now try to understand, suppose they pass the rectified order and there is a mistake in rectified order. Can rectified order again rectified? Answer is yes. But now question is that you will get the remaining time or fresh 4-year time from the year in which rectified order is passed. Right answer is you will get the 4-year fresh time. You will get the 4-year fresh time limit from the end of the financial year in which rectified order was passed. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand one more thing. Okay, sir, suppose if application is made by SSC, then department has to make the rectification within 6 months from the end of the month in which application was made. Within 6 months from the end of the month in which application was made. Otherwise, if they have fails to rectify within 6 months, in that case, that order should be rectified. That is presumed that rectified in the favor of the assessee. Now try to understand one more thing. Assessee can make the application only within 4 years from the end of the financial year in which order sought to be rectified was passed. Now try to understand, if you are not satisfied with the rectified order, you can make an appeal to the CIT appeal or ITAT, whatever, depends on who rectified your order. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand one more thing. Section 156 is related to the demand notice. Demand notice, this section says that whenever any assessment is completed and department wants to raise the money from you, then department will send you the demand notice under section 156. Department will send you the demand notice, but whenever they issued the intimation, like normal intimation 143(1) or TDS intimation, they will not send you the demand notice because that intimation is treated as deemed to be a demand notice. So suppose they already issued you the intimation, then that intimation will be treated as deemed to be a demand notice under section 156. But suppose there is an assessment case and all, penalty case and all, then obviously they will issue you the demand notice. Now whatever demand notice you have received, that you have to pay within the 30 days from the date of the receipt of the demand notice. If you have not paid in 30 days, then you will be treated as assessee in default. And if you treated as assessee in default, then from 31st date, section 220 interest is applicable. That is 1% per month or part of the month, and also penalty is applicable of the 100%. Means assessing officer can impose the 100% penalty on your outstanding amount. And section 222 says that like a tax recovery officer can start the recovery proceeding if you not paid the demand within the 30 days. Next part is related to protective assessment. Now try to understand one thing. Suppose there is a ownership dispute in any property, or there is a some income and some 2 or 3 people are claiming that income. He is saying that it's my income, that person is saying my income and all. In that case, or suppose there is a ownership dispute of any property. In that case, what happens? Now question is that income has to be included in whose hand? Suppose there is a dispute between me and my brother. There is a dispute related to property, and our case is referred to the court. Now our case in the litigation, that property dispute between brothers. Now try to understand. Suppose from that property 5 lakh rupees rent is coming. So that 5 lakh rupees is received by the court, and court will make the FD and all. Now question is that 5 lakh will be assessed in my hand or my brother hand. Right answer is here assessing officer will include that 5 lakh in my hand as well as my brother hand. Means every year he will add on 5 lakh in my hand as well as my brother hand. That is called protective assessment. Means on the protective basis he will include that income. But he is not going to collect the tax from any person. He is not going to collect the tax from me as well as my brother till the conclusion of that dispute. Suppose after 60 years, after suppose 5-6 years, suppose court gave a judgment and court is saying that now this property belongs to BB sir, then obviously I have to pay the tax to the assessing officer. Means I will pay the tax to the department because my assessment is already done on the protective basis. Then I have to pay the tax to the department. Now next is the income tax authority. So basically in income tax authority, first is the CBDT. You know that in CBDT there are 2 parts. One is the investigation wing, one is your assessment wing. In assessment wing, highest level authority is a CCIT. Highest level authority is the CCIT or PCCIT. After that, CIT or PCIT Joint Commissioner or Additional Commissioner. After that, ACDC, ITO, TRO and Inspector. That is called your assessment wing. And in investigation wing, highest level officer is a DGIT or PDGIT. After that, DIT and PDIT. After that, Joint Director or Additional Director, Assistant Director and Deputy Director, they are officer in the investigation wing. Like CIT appeal is also CIT appeal is also an income tax authority. Now next part is related to the power of IT authority under section 131. Now section 131 gives the four power to the income tax authority, and that same power is given to the like judges of the court also. Income tax authority has the power that they can do the inspection and discovery. Suppose I have constructed one building. Can assessing officer come to my home and check that building? Answer is yes. They have the power, they can do the inspection and discovery. Second power is that they can call any person. They can call any person and they can take that person on the oath. Means Gita pe haath dilana and Quran pe haath dilana, that way. So they can call any person including the bank manager and they can take that person on the oath. They can record the statement and all. After that, they can issue the summon or commission to any person. Summon means like that personal presence of that person, and after that they can call for books of accounts and they can retain that books of accounts for the 15 working days. So there are four power of the income tax authority under section 131. First power, inspection and discovery, calling the person and oath. Now third power is compelling the books of accounts and retain that books of accounts for the 15 working days and issuing the summon to any person. Now next section is 133. 133 related to the call for information. Now here income tax authority has the power that income tax authority can call any information from any person. Now suppose, try to understand, can my assessing officer ask information to my bank related to BB sir? Answer is yes. Can my assessing officer ask information to Zerodha share broker related to BB sir? Answer is yes. So here they can ask any information. Now try to understand, if any information is demanded by the department but that assessment is not pending related to that person. Suppose like department is asking some information from my bank but my assessment is not pending. In that case, any officer can ask that type of information only with the prior approval of the CIT. Prior approval of the CIT, PCIT. If CIT, PCIT approve, then only they can ask that type of information from any person when assessee's assessment is not pending. But if suppose joint director or assistant director or deputy director, they are asking that information, in that case there is no need of any approval. Now next part is section 133B, that is called power to collect the information. Now this section says that income tax authority has the power that they can enter into any place where business or profession is conducted on. They can enter at any place where business or profession is conducted on. They can enter and they can collect the information from that place. That is called power to collect the information. But guys, try to understand, they can enter only during the time when that place is open for conducting the business. So they are just enter into that place where business and profession is conducted on. They will collect the information and they will move out. Now try to understand, they can enter only during the time when that place is open for conducting the business. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand, in this section they will not impound your books of accounts and all. They will not check your books of accounts and all. They will come, they will ask for some information, they will collect that information and they will move out. That is section 133B. Now next section is a 133C. This section says that suppose investigation wing is having some information related to you. Investigation wing is having some information related to you that you have some black money in the Swiss bank and all. So what happened? To verify that information, they will call some information from you. They will call some information from you, and after collecting that information, if they think that information is genuine, they will pass on that information to assessing officer, and after that assessing officer will start his work. Next part is 133A, that is called power to survey. Now try to understand, IT authority has the power that they can enter at any place where business, profession or charitable activity is carried on. Where business, profession or charitable activity is carried on, they can enter and survey that particular place. Now try to understand, sir, question is that what is the power under the survey? So whenever they enter, they can check your books of accounts, documents and all. They can check their books of accounts document. They can mark the identification marks on books of accounts document. They can take the copy of books of account. They can take the extract of books of accounts. They can impound your books of accounts also. Means they can, like that take your books of accounts for maximum 15 working days. 15 working days. They can check the stock in trade, money, bullion, jewelry, any other valuable article and things they found during the survey. But can they seize or can they impound that books of accounts and all? Sorry, they can impound that asset and all? Answer is no. They can impound the books of accounts for 15 days, but they cannot impound any money, bullion, jewelry, any other valuable article and things during the survey. They can check, they can verify, they can make the inventory, means they can make the list, but they cannot impound or seize or confiscated any of your asset. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand, sir. You are saying that a survey can be conducted only at a place where business, profession or charitable activity is carried on. Answer is yes. But guys, try to understand, if your any books of accounts document or asset are kept at any other place, like at director's home or a partner's home or trustee home and all, or chartered accountant office. The question is that can survey can be conducted at other place also? Answer is yes. Survey can be conducted at other place also if books of accounts document asset are kept at any other place. That is called extension of the survey. Now try to understand what is the time restriction. Sir, is there is any entry restriction during the survey? Answer is yes. If they enter for survey at any place where business or profession is carried on, they can enter only during the time when that place is open for conducting the business. What I am saying, that they can enter at a time when that place is open for conducting the business. But suppose they are surveying any other place like director home and all, in that case they can enter only after sunrise but before sunset. They can enter only after sunrise but before sunset. And guys, more important thing, this time limit is only for entry, not for exit. This time limit is only for entry, not for exit. They can exit after 5-6 days also, no problem at all. Now try to understand, if any income tax authority is going for survey and if that officer is lower the joint commissioner, that officer is like inspector or any ACDC or ITO is going for survey, then they should have the permission or approval from the joint commissioner. If joint commissioner will approve, then only they can go for the survey. If joint commissioner not approve, obviously they cannot go for the survey. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to the, sir, question is that they can conduct the survey at the place where business, where marriage or ceremony or any event and all, party and all going on, they can survey that place also. Answer is yes, but only after the completion of that party. Only after the completion of that party, ceremony, marriage, event, after completion of that party, they can enter and they can survey that place also. Now try to understand, there is a TDS TCS survey also. TDS TCS surveys, limited purpose surveys, wherever a business profession is conducted on, that place they can enter and they can check the TDS TCS compliance. And just to ensure that you have deducted the TDS or you have collected the TCS and all, they can come and they can check the TDS TCS compliance. That is called TDS TCS survey. Now next part is related to section 132, that is the raid. In practical life we call it raid, but it is not a raid, it is a search and seizure. Search and seizure. So now question is that, sir, when search and seizure can be authorized or when raid can be conducted? So raid can be conducted in the two cases. First case is, suppose if notice under section 142(1), that is RIA notice, or summon under section 131 is issued and you have not complied that. Or suppose if department will issue you the notice or summon and you will not comply that. You will not comply that. Your past record is very bad. If they issue you the summon or notice, you are not going to comply that. In that case, they can conduct the raid. Now next part, suppose in your possession, you are having some money, bullion, jewelry, any other valuable article and things that you have not disclosed in your income tax, or you are not going to disclose in the income tax, and they are having the reason to believe related to that, they can conduct the raid. Now question is that, who will issue the search warrant? Who will issue the search warrant means who will authorize the search warrant? Obviously higher authority, that is the CCIT or PCCIT, DGIT or PDGIT, DIT or PDIT, CIT or PCCIT. Means basically that higher authority will authorize the search, means they will issue the search warrant. But guys, try to understand, joint commissioner, joint director or additional commissioner, additional director can also issue the search warrant if it is authorized by the, if they have authorized by the CBDT. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to, sir, what is the power during the search? So first power, they can enter any place, any building, any vessel and any vehicle where they suspect that any money, bullion, jewelry, any other valuable article and things, books of accounts and document are kept. They suspect that they can enter and they can search that particular place. If any person is not providing the key of any box, almirah, container and all, they have the power that they can break that. They can search any person who is already inside that place, or that person is going outside from inside, or any person is coming inside. They can search that particular person. After that, whatever money, bullion, jewelry, any other valuable article and things, books of accounts and document they like get there, they can seize that also. Means they can take out and they can take, like they will make the panchnama, and after that they can take that particular money, bullion, jewelry, any other valuable article and things and books and all. But guys, try to understand, they cannot seize one thing, that is a stock in trade. Your recorded stock in trade, they will not seize. They don't have the power to seize the stock in trade. So recorded stock in trade, they are not going to seize that. Now try to understand, there are some, like one is the physical seizure. Physical seizure means obviously they will take that asset, that is called physical seizure. One is the deemed seizure or constructive seizure. Now what is the meaning of deemed seizure or constructive seizure? Suppose if any, it is not possible to seize any asset due to its weight, volume, nature or quantity. In that case, they will issue you one order and they will say that please don't move this particular asset without our permission. That is called deemed seizure or constructive seizure. Suppose they got the RDX of the 10 kg. In raid, they got the RDX of the 10 kg. So it is not possible to take that RDX and all. So due to the nature, it's not possible or practicable to seize that asset. So they will issue you one order, that is called deemed seizure or constructive seizure. Now there is one more, that is the prohibitory order or order of restraint. Suppose if any asset, it is not possible or practicable to seize that asset, but reason is not that particular. Reason is not a weight, volume, nature, quantity. Due to any other reason. Due to any other reason means just they have some, that doubt that this asset may be your or not. Suppose I can take one example. Now raid is conducted at my home. There is some employee at my home, and now suppose employee is having some gold necklace. Now, like income tax authorities have some doubt that this gold necklace may be related to BB sir, but obviously they will not take that gold necklace. So they will give one order of restraint to that employee. You should not deal with that gold necklace till the time we permit. And normally this time, this maximum validity of this order of restraint or prohibitory order is 60 days. After 60 days, automatically it will be vacated. Within 60 days, obviously you cannot deal, but after 60 days, you can do whatever you want. Next part is related to presumption or assumption. During the search, there is very strong presumption. First presumption is that whatever assets, books of accounts, documents found at your place, it is presumed that it belongs to you only. Second, whatever books of accounts document found at your place, it belongs to you, and content is true. Content is true. Whatever document they found, and it seems that you have signed, attested or stamped that document, they will presume that it is signed or stamped or attested or written by you only. That is the very strong presumption during the raid. Now next section is related to section 132(9)(a). Now 132(9)(a) is saying that suppose if any officer conducted the raid, but that officer is not having your jurisdiction, obviously your assessing officer is not going to conduct the raid, any other officer will conduct the raid. So suppose if the authorized officer is not having the jurisdiction over you, then whatever books of accounts document or asset he seized, he will hand over that books of accounts document asset to assessing officer having jurisdiction over you within the 60 days after the completion of search. Within 60 days after completion of search. Now section 132(9)(b) says that suppose during the search or within the 60 days after the completion of search, if here a raid party, that is the department, want that there should be a provisional attachment, then they have power that they can provisionally attach your property, like your bank account, your immovable property, they can provisionally attach. But that provisionally attachment maximum period will be a 6 months, means after 6 months it will be automatically vacated. Now next section is related to the 132(a). Now 132(a) says that requisition. Now requisition means suppose if raid is conducted by any other authority like FEMA, GST department, election commission, or suppose raid is conducted by income tax department only, but asset is or books of accounts with the any other authority. Like any other authority means books of accounts or assets is with the election commission or police department or GST department or ED or NCB and all. In that case, their income tax officer, income tax authority will call that information. They will call that information, that is called requisition. Now next section is related to 132(b). 132(b) is related to application of books of accounts and asset. Now whatever asset and books of accounts they have seized, what they will do with that books of accounts and asset. So guys, whenever raid is conducted, then obviously they are going to make the assessment under section 153A. So after completion assessment under section 153A, within 30 days they will hand over you the books of accounts. Means after completion of assessment under section 153A, within 30 days they will hand over you the book, but they can retain the more than 30 days also. If assessing officer is having the permission of CIT, CCIT and they record the reason, then they can hold for more than 30 days also. Now try to understand what will happen with the assets. Assets, there are two type of the asset. One is your explain asset, one is the unexplained asset. Guys, if there is a explain asset, then you have to make an application for explanation asset within 30 days from the end of the month in which asset was seized. What I am saying that? If there is an explain asset, then you have to make an application. You have to make an application within 30 days from the end of the month in which asset was seized. Suppose your application is valid and here assessing officer is satisfied with your application, then assessing officer will release your explain asset. Assessing officer will release your explain asset within 120 days from the date of completion of the search. Within 120 days from the date of completion of search, he will release your explain asset, but after adjusting your existing tax liability. Whatever existing tax liability means related to that tax liability, if department already issued you the demand notice and all, that is called existing tax liability. So for existing tax liability, they will adjust the existing tax liability and after that they will return your explain asset. What about the unexplained asset? So unexplained asset, they will hand over you only after the completion of assessment under section 153A. So after assessment under section 153A, they will adjust all asset with existing tax liability, new tax liability, and if anything is remain, they will return you. Guys, try to understand here, department will give you the 0.5% interest also on the money return. Whatever money return, they will give you the 0.5% interest per month or part of the month, but that interest will be starting from the after 120 days from the date of completion of search. After 120 days from date of completion of search completed after 120 days means from 121 days until the completion of assessment under section 153A, you are going to get the interest at the rate 0.5% per month and part of the month. Now next section is 153A, that is related to assessment in the search cases. How they are going to make the assessment. So guys, whenever search is conducted, obviously they will make the assessment. They have to make the assessment under section 153A. So suppose suppose search conducted in current year, then just ignore the year in which search is started. Just ignore the year in which search is started. They will ask you return for the last 6 years. They will ask you return for the last 6 years. Last 6 years means just ignore the year in which search is started, ignore that year, and last 6 year return they will ask under section 153A. They will send you the notice under section 153A and they will ask you the return of the last 6 years. Now try to understand guys, they can ask you the return of before the 6 year also. Means they can go up to 10 year. They can go up to 10 year means before 6 year but maximum 10 year means in simple word I can say that before 6 year maximum 4 year. So total can be a 10 years. But guys, this 4-year return they can call only if the 3 conditions are satisfied. First condition, search is conducted on or after 1st April 2017. Second condition, there is an income escaping of any 1 year or 4 year and that income escaping is more than 50 lakh means 50 lakh or more than 50 lakh and that income is represented in the immovable property share and security loan or advances or deposit in the bank. What I am saying that income is represented in the immovable property share and security loan or advances or deposit in the bank, then they can go up to the 6 year. Now guys, you have to file the return of the last 6 year or 10 year in response to notice under section 153A. Now assessing officer is going to complete the assessment of last 6 year as well as the current year. Current year means year in which search was started. So he is going to make the assessment of the current year, last 6 year or 10 year. Last 6 year or 10 year, he will complete the assessment under section. Now try to understand, last 6 year or 10 year, he will complete the assessment under section 153A and current year assessment he will complete under section 143.3 or 144. Current year assessment he will complete under section 143.3 or 144. Now try to understand, for last 6 or 10 years, suppose if any assessment is pending of that year. If any assessment is pending of that year, in that case that assessment will abate, that assessment will come to end, and now assessment will be completed under section 153A only. But suppose if any appeal or reference or revision or appeal, reference, revision or rectification is going on, that will be continued, that will be continued, that basically that will be continued, no problem at all. But only that part will be continued. On the remaining part, assessing officer is going to complete the assessment under section 153A, that is called partial merger. Now try to understand. Next point says that suppose raid is conducted at my place, but suppose if any asset or books of accounts they found and that is belonging to any other person, suppose that is related to my uncle, and my uncle is staying in the Ahmedabad, I am staying in the Mumbai. So what happened, that my assessing officer will hand over that asset to the assessing officer having jurisdiction over my uncle, and my uncle is staying in the Ahmedabad. So my assessing officer will send that asset to the assessing officer of the Ahmedabad. Now assessing officer of Ahmedabad will check the return of my uncle. Now suppose if he found that yes, this asset is included in that return, then obviously he is going to return that asset to my uncle. But suppose he found that my uncle has not included that asset in the return of income, in that case he will issue the last 6 year notice to my uncle, 6 year or 10 year, and my uncle is also now need to file the return and all, and my uncle also assessment will be completed under section 153A. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to the 153D. Now try to understand. In raid cases, who will complete the assessment? Your small assessing officer like ITO, ACDC, or a higher assessing officer? Like you know that senior assessing officer is a joint commissioner. Right answer is a joint commissioner. In case of the raid cases, your assessment has to be completed by joint commissioner. But if joint commissioner permit, then any lower level officer can also complete the assessment. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand. Sir, what is the time limit to complete the assessment? What is the time limit to complete the assessment? What is the time limit to complete the assessment? So guys, try to understand. Your last 6 year, 10 year or current year assessment has to be completed within 21 months from the end of the financial year in which search was completed. But suppose if search is completed, in financial year 18-19, then 18-month time limit. And if search is completed in financial year 19-20 onwards, then that time limit will be 12 months from the end of the financial year in which search was completed. You got my point or not? Yes. So what I'm saying that all people just pay attention. What is the time limit? You just have to remember that suppose search is conducted in previous year 19-20 onwards, then 12 months from the end of the financial year in which search was completed. If search is conducted in the previous year 18-19, then 18 months from the end of the financial year in which search was completed. Now try to understand. This is the completion. After that, sir, there is a time limit. We already discussed that time limit of 12 months under section 143.3, 144, 147, and here also. And after that, I have given some table related to the extension of time limit. Now guys, try to understand. This time limit will be extended. Suppose extension time limit, where extension? Suppose if any special audit direction is given, or suppose assessing officer is asking to central government about violation of some condition by institution, hospital and all, or suppose if reference is made to the valuation officer or special audit direction, or suppose department is giving reheard opportunity to assess C and all. So whatever time lost in that particular situation, that time will be extended. Means assessing officer is going to get the additional time. Assessing officer is going to get the additional time. Assessing officer is going to get the additional time. You got my point or not? Yes. Now there is last section 292BB. Now 292BB saying that suppose if any notice was not served in proper time, or notice not served or issued in the proper manner, assessee can challenge that. Yes. But guys, if assessment is already completed, then after completion of assessment, assessee cannot challenge that assessment. After completion of assessment, assessee cannot say that my notice was not served upon him in the particular time, or notice was not proper and all. In that case, if till the assessment completion, means if assessment is going on, he can challenge that, but after assessment completion, everything is fine. Yes. So this is the completion of your assessment procedure and return filing. So guys, hope so you enjoy that particular lecture, but obviously this is the theory. This lecture is only to recap the concept, whatever you have done. So this is only to recap the concept. So guys, thanks a lot people. All South India student, hope so your study is going good and you are going to appear in this November exam and you are going to give your best 100%. You know that you have already you have given the 4 to 5 years to this particular CA course. Now there is only 1.5 month, maximum 1.5 month is pending, 1 month is pending. Guys, give your best, give your 100% and give your everything for this particular exam. And obviously surely exam is going to be conducted in the month of November only. You should prepare that, you should be motivated, you should give the that self motivation is needed. And for that self motivation, just try to do everything whatever you want to do. But guys, please study, please give at least 10 to 12 hours every day, effective study, effective for your study and all. So now I really love to record this revision lecture, but I'm not going to get the time because you know that my English batch as well as Hindi batch for May 2021 is going on. Every day I have to record the 7 hours lecture for them, one lecture for Hindi and one lecture for English and all. So guys, I really love to record more lecture, but please don't wait for the revision lecture. I just want you to study. You study. If I will get the time, I will record the lecture and I will put the lecture, English lecture for you. But if I will not get the time, then obviously it won't be possible for me. So please don't message me and all. But I wish that you should clear this exam, and best of luck for your examination. Give your 100%. Obviously, all the best. All the best, do the best, God will do the rest. Thanks a lot people. That's enough for today from my side.